Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So the end of the season community event didn't change the Eliksni Quarter much. If the narrative does remember anything about this community event, it'll undoubtedly be more because of the cutscene and because of, well, what the community event supposedly enabled through that cutscene. Even though I still stand by the fact that, noble as both sides of it are, they're still kind of non sequiturs. Either way, there is actually something that came along with the community event in the Eliksni Quarter that tells us something about the future of the game and the next season, and also links in potentially to what might be happening in Lightfall. It comes in the form of, well, this. A frame. A sweeper bot, as some of you guys might know it better. The obvious thing about this frame, and the few others that are similar to it that can be found around the Eliksni Quarter post-cleanup, is that, well, if you've been around long enough, you can see that this is not a regular sweeper bot frame. It's not even one of the Red Jack combat frames. This is a special Warmind frame. This alone might be reason to believe that the plot shakeups of the next season will involve the Warmind once again. And that's before we discuss the news that dropped yesterday in both the TWAB and on Twitter. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about all of this information. Starting off with the frames and the context of things as they stand. For those of you who are not in the know and who've kind of checked out of the story a little bit, I'll go over things really briefly and catch you up on all the things that have gone on with Rasputin. And I have to presume that most of you are well aware of the sequence of events already, and if that's the case, then feel free to skip ahead a little bit in the video. Back in the Season of the Worthy, Rasputin's bunker network was reactivated by us, and that would allow him to deal with the Almighty. Upon the start of the Season of Arrivals, Rasputin used its newly resurgent power to respond to the approaching Pyramid fleet with force. This attack was repelled, and in quick succession Rasputin was attacked in turn by the Darkness. This attack is framed in the lore as if it's like a parent waving off a child, like it meant less than nothing in the grand scheme of things, and this would be of great concern to everyone for obvious reasons, including, of course, Anna Bray, the Warmind's last link to the Lost City. Anna worked alongside her ghost Jinju for a long stretch of time to discover what had happened to the Warmind, and quite luckily, they discovered that there was a fragment of Rasputin left. This fragment was gathered within an engram hastily, with a data transfer that was less than perfect. Anna and Jinju would later take Rasputin back to the Lost City as the time period of Beyond Light began. In the expansion's opening cutscene, we saw Anna Bray working on another keepsake from Mars, a custom exo frame which it's speculated is going to be used in order to house the Warmind in the future. Later in the Season of the Risen, in the lore tab of the Grand Overture Exotic, we would see Anna Bray working alongside the Scions in order to further investigate what remained of Rasputin within the engram. Whilst it was revealed that the Warmind was still alive within the engram, it was also revealed that there were some significant barriers still preventing his return. That didn't stop a variety of Warmind gear being sold throughout the seasons leading up to this point, which Bungie has always used as a sort of tease for the future. And it didn't stop this little exchange about the Warmind from coming up this season in the expedition missions in the Cosmodrome.
So this is where the Warmind Rasputin stockpiled its weapons, eh?
That's correct. It was once the most powerful intelligence in the Sol system, and it commanded an enormous arsenal. But after the Dark Fleet arrived, its consciousness was transferred into an engram.
Really? It must be the most valuable engram in the whole system. Priceless. Who has it now, did you say?
Also, do note that the Archangel ship, as it's referred to, which is obviously of Warmind design, talks about the idea of Rasputin returning in the future at some point. More so than this, you have to consider that the frames that we see in the Eliksni Quarter were also summoned alongside all the forces of Rasputin in the Season of the Worthy. In particular, the frames were alongside the heavy frames in the public event of that season, where we had to send satellites into orbit and defend Rasputin's systems as they occurred. This is also not to mention the heavier frames that could also be fabricated, which are not seen here in the city, but probably still exist somewhere out there. The existence and previous role of these frames isn't the only hint as to their control or at least affiliation with the Warmind. After all, you can find a portion of the Tyrant's logo on the frames if you look closely enough. So the frames are all but guaranteed to be somewhat related to the Warmind. The next question logically is, well, how did they get there? It's a really multifaceted question because aside from the fact that Bungie wanted to clearly use these as a teaser, you have to remember that these are probably far more sophisticated than the typical frames of the Last City itself. These things are meant to be on the front lines putting down Cabal legionaries, not shoveling gravel in the city. Canonically, I think the best explanation that could possibly be guessed at is simply the fact that these frames are a sort of test. We know that Anna Bray has been working to return the Warmind, and so it's not too illogical that she would have sourced some of its military capital from the field for testing. This might not just include the frames we see here. If such a theory is to be believed, then we have to contemplate the idea that the frames we see here are actually successful test subjects of Anna's, and that she might have released them for general service now that they've fulfilled their purpose of helping her understand how the Warmind could be returned. However, there is a far more radical possibility, which is simply that the Warmind is already back in action, at least in some rather limited sense. If a minor submind of the Tyrant could be revived, then it's entirely possible that he would be able to exert limited control over certain connected systems. Thus, it might not be impossible for the Warmind, in some regard, to be active again, albeit in a dramatically weakened state. If even some of this is true, then it acts as a further point to say that our next season is going to be all about the Warmind again, and Bungie has all but confirmed this in the TWAB that just came out, where they stated that there will be new Seraph weapons, of course Seraph weapons being specifically tied to the Warmind, which are being released next season. Of course, this all goes without mentioning the fact that in the lore, there are a few other things that Rasputin has been quite clearly and cleanly connected to, and I think it would be fair at this point to discuss the fact that the Dark Future Lorebook exists. Now here's the thing. The Dark Future Lorebook I still think is not an accurate guide to our future timeline, and I know there are some people who cling to it just like people clung to Truth to Power, and I want to let everybody know that that's not the attitude we should take towards the Dark Future Lorebook. I don't believe that anything in there is going to pan out in quite the same way. For starters, everything that we've seen about the relationship between Anna Bray and Elsie Bray is completely different. The lack of corruption from Stasis is different. Savathun's role in taking on the tower and Eramis's ultimate success are both different. Neither of those things happened. In our timeline, Savathun even became a wielder of the light. Very different. We're in a different timeline that is so divergent from the Dark Future that I think even if we do tread across major plot points of it, it's well worth remembering that this is not the same timeline. This is something that we have to always remember because it's very tempting to look at it as this thing that always points to the future. And whilst it doesn't always do that, I do think it indicates the kind of vague flavor of the future. It's not something you can follow precisely, but it's something where you can look at things and say, ah, that's a story element that might come up. In particular, when we look at the Dark Future Lorebook in the context of the Warmind, we know that the Warmind was resurrected into an exoframe on Europa. This obviously brings about a bunch of questions about our own Rasputin that also will probably involve the exoframe that we saw in the cutscene from the beginning of Beyond Light, which Anna has been diligently working on for quite some time now. That same storyline is probably something that will be followed, just not to the same conclusion. That's my bet at least. In the Dark Future, the forces of Rasputin and the city lost. Perhaps this time we won't, even if we do resurrect the Warmind. The Warmind is also a figure of note for the future of the Lightfall expansion, given that there's a lot of technology in Neo Muna that realistically we could see getting linked to by the Warmind. The nanite tech of the Cloud Striders is something that comes to mind immediately when you think of Rasputin, and something that could give him a cutting edge in the coming wars is definitely something that he would gravitate towards. Technologically speaking, it's more advanced than even Siva, and Rasputin has previously used Siva to kill Guardians, indicating the degree of power that Rasputin might be able to wield. But there's something else that I think intrinsically links Rasputin to Neomuna beyond simply this technology, and it's this. He probably was the one that hid their existence. You see, when we finished the Witch Queen investigation board, we ended up learning that little tidbit of lore about Nephele Stronghold, which told us that the Warmind was holding onto records of a place somewhere out in the depths of the system, somewhere which was referred to as Nephele Stronghold. This was our first indication about what was going on. This was realistically the point at which we could sit there, point to Nephele Stronghold and say Rasputin was hiding something. And this is the interesting thing. It was removed from his own data backups. He had no idea that this was even a piece of information he was holding onto. The witness only managed to dig that information out there with its claws based on the fact that it was able to dig through Rasputin's data from the past, which is why all of those scars of time are left across the surface of Mars, which you can still see if you go to the Enclave. So Rasputin was trying to hide the truth of Neomuna, and more importantly, the witness dug it up. This tells me that we are going to be on that search as well, given that Osiris talked about how Savathun was hiding a great secret or power on Neptune as well, and I think this is going to lead us to the following vague plot. We're going to sit there and follow the lead from Osiris, telling us about that secret on Neptune. The Vanguard will relate it to the information gathered in our investigation of the Throne World, and we'll understand that the witness not only has already recovered this information, but also that we should recover it as well. This will be the search for Nephele Stronghold, and ultimately it will lead us back to Rasputin, and the efforts of the season will probably turn towards either his resurrection or assisting him in the discovery, or rediscovery, of Neomuna, the Nephele Stronghold that he erased from his own memory banks. And all of these little bits and pieces fall into place quite cleanly when you think about the fact that after this, we are going to Lightfall, which is set in Neomuna. So it's now got this clear progression. We understand what we're doing with Rasputin, and we have a season that links from where we are now into where we will be in the next expansion. And of course, that's not even to mention the little tidbit that Bungie dropped on Twitter. This tweet dropped, and it just showed the Osiris and Saint 14 cutscene again. You know, that's nice. The caption? Interesting. Bungie doesn't do these things without any reason. They don't say that Xivu Arath is stirring for no reason whatsoever, and frankly, that tells us exactly what the shape of the adversary we're going to see in the next season is. This is a good thing. We're keeping to certain narrative threads here, and I'll talk about that more in my next video where I just kind of critique the season and see how all of those things are going, but essentially, yeah, this tells us what our next enemy is going to be. I don't think it's impossible that we'll see some other threats in particular locations of this season, but if you ask me, we're going to be exploring potentially Mars, and almost definitely somewhere in Europa will be involved, if only for the sake of resurrecting Rasputin and putting him properly into that exoframe. The enemies that we'll face will be Hive, most likely. Hive of the brood of Xivu Arath. Although, I wouldn't think it impossible that the Lucent brood will be involved as well. Hive civil wars have happened before while they've been allied, but a bitter Hive war of light and dark? That'd be something else, and something I would love to see. Something that we would inevitably stumble upon, but also choose our own third side. And it'll be really interesting to see what we choose to do in that moment. I wonder if this plays into the greater theme of Savathun and what she's doing now. I wonder if it plays into the idea of what her ghost Imaru has been doing. And furthermore, it makes me wonder if we could see a Cabal threat alongside the Hive enemies that we'll be fighting that are loyal to Xivu Arath. The reason being, if we're starting to consolidate our forces, such as the forces of the House of Light, the Guardians, and Keitel's Cabal Ascendancy, it might be time for the Witness to start doing the same. The battle lines have been drawn in the background, and I think these frames are a tiny indicator of where we're going next, alongside all these other little hints that have dropped in the last few days. But for now, we shall see what happens when we inevitably do reach that new season. And when we do, I'll see you all there with plenty of content. But that's all from me for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. And of course, if you want more Destiny content, hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. Tell me, what do you think the narrative arc of the next season is going to vaguely be? We know that it starts with the Warmind, involves Xivu Arath, and leads to Neomuna. Where do you think we go? Who do you think the major characters are going to be? I think Anna Bray is an obvious one. I don't know about the rest. Tell me what you think in the comments section down below. But, as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you Starside.